Have you ever just looked at the world and wondered how it got so divided? I mean, why are some nations so incredibly wealthy while others seem completely trapped in a cycle of poverty? It's one of the biggest puzzles of our time. Well, in his landmark book, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, historian David S. Landis gives us a provocative and really unflinching answer. So let's explore what he had to say.
Okay, to really get a sense of just how massive this problem is, look at this number. The difference in income per person between the richest nation on the planet, like Switzerland, and the poorest, like Mozambique, is a mind-blowing 400 to 1. That's not just a gap, it's a chasm.
So, how on earth did we get here? Is this huge disparity just an accident of geography, a legacy of exploitation, or is there something else, something bigger at play? That's the mystery we're going to unpack right now.
Landis actually frames this whole economic divide as the 400 to 1 question. And for him, figuring out where it came from isn't just about history. It's the absolute key to understanding the modern world itself. And right off the bat, Landis says the answer is not random chance. Not at all. He says this is a long, deliberate historical process. He argues that centuries ago, some societies just got better at creating wealth. And that single ability, well, it became the great divider. Now, this is where Landis's argument gets really interesting and pretty controversial. He puts forward what he straight up calls a Eurocentric explanation. And what he means by that is that he's laser-focused on Europe as the source of this economic takeoff. He argues that all the key ingredients for modern wealth were uniquely combined there first.
And Landis was completely unapologetic about this. With a quote like this, "I prefer truth to good think," he's making it crystal clear that his goal isn't to be politically correct. His goal is to follow the historical evidence wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable the conclusion might be.
So the bottom line is this. He traces the origin of this massive economic split back to one specific place. He says the race towards the modern world really kicked off in Europe, creating this huge head start that the rest of the globe has been trying to catch up to ever since.
So, what was it? What was Europe's supposed winning formula? Well, Landis boils it down to two things that were constantly interacting: its culture and its relentless internal competition.
This slide shows the contrast perfectly. You have these huge, unified empires like China, which were very stable. But Europe, on the other hand, was what Landis calls a convoluted, inconvenient mosaic of competing states. And that fragmentation, that was the secret sauce. It meant rulers had to compete for the best people and for money. If a king tried to crush a new business, the smartest merchants and innovators could just pack their bags and move next door. In a big, unified empire, there was nowhere to run. And this is what grew out of that. That competitive pressure created this fertile ground for new ideas. It helped foster scientific discovery, it led to more secure property rights, and it nurtured market-driven economies. Basically, even when rulers wanted to shut down progress, they couldn't. The roots were just too widespread. And all of this unique European environment eventually led to the single biggest game changer in human economic history, the Industrial Revolution. Landis has this great phrase for it. He calls it the moment humanity invented invention. We created this self-sustaining cycle of progress that would quite literally change everything.
So what was it, really? Landis defines the revolution by three main changes. First, replacing human skill with tireless, precise machines. Second, swapping muscle power, whether it's from people or animals, with inanimate power, like the steam engine. And third, shifting to new and abundant raw materials, like using coal instead of wood.
The impact was just seismic. The Industrial Revolution, in a great paradox, brought the world closer together with things like trade and new communication, but at the same time, it cracked the globe in two. It created this deep, lasting divide between the newly industrialized West and what Landis calls the rest.
And to really put that split into perspective, let's just rewind for a second. Right before the Industrial Revolution really hit its stride, about 250 years ago, the income gap between the world's richest and poorest places was about 5 to 1.
And now, as we saw at the start, that gap has exploded to 400 to 1. That is the real legacy of the Industrial Revolution. It created winners and losers on a scale the world had never, ever seen before.
Okay, so that's the history. But what's the lesson for today? Why is this book, which is almost 30 years old, still so important? Because Landis believed that if you analyze this history correctly, you can actually figure out a modern formula for what makes nations rich.
He basically reverse engineers history to create a recipe, a set of ingredients that a perfect, growth-oriented society would have. And these aren't just abstract ideas, they're his conclusions drawn directly from looking at what actually worked.
And here it is, Landes's 5-part formula. First, you have to master and create your own technology. Second, you got to educate your people. Third, you need a meritocracy, where jobs go to people based on skill, not who they know. Fourth, you have to encourage enterprise, give people the chance to compete and try new things. And finally, number 5, you have to secure the rewards. Let people actually enjoy the fruits of their own work.
See the common thread running through all of these? It's that culture and institutions are everything. The rules of the game, the values a society holds, the political structures, those are what ultimately decide who wins and who loses. In other words, it's not really about the resources you have, but about how your society lets you use them.
And this all leads us to Landes's most powerful and maybe his most challenging message. He argues that, yeah, outside help can matter, but real, lasting economic growth has to come from within. As he puts it so well, no empowerment is so effective as self-empowerment.
Which leaves us with one final, very difficult question. If history seems to lay out a clear formula for creating wealth, why is it so incredibly hard for so many countries to actually follow it? That's the challenge right at the heart of the wealth and poverty of nations. And it's a question that's still shaping the lives of billions of people today.